This is the continuation of Rebel Witch. The Crimson Moth, Book 2. Summarized by Cellwave Audio and narrated by Bill. Chapter 25. The march resumed at dawn, the men moving slower than before, weighed down by loss and fatigue. The air in the mountains grew colder, the path steeper and more treacherous. Snow capped the peaks above, and frost clung to the rocks underfoot. Rune wrapped her cloak tighter as she followed the column, watching Gideon at the head. His determination pushed the company forward even when every step seemed like a battle of its own. She knew he would never show weakness. Not here. Not with so many depending on him. Yet she could see the burden pressing heavily on his shoulders. By midday, they reached a plateau overlooking the valley below. Smoke rose from distant watchfires, proof that Imperial scouts were not far away. Aiden pointed them out, his tone grim, warning that they had little time before being discovered. Gideon ordered the company to spread out and rest briefly, but there was tension in every movement. Rune sat on a boulder, her eyes on the horizon, wondering how long it would be before the enemy struck again. The mountains seemed endless, a labyrinth of stone that offered no comfort, only concealment for those who hunted them. Their respite ended quickly. A horn blast echoed through the valley, sharp and unmistakable. The Imperials had found them. Soldiers scrambled to their feet, gripping weapons and forming ranks as the sound of boots thundered from the slopes below. Rune's heart pounded as she scanned the ridges, the enemy pouring out like shadows from every crevice. Gideon's commands cut through the fear, his voice steady as he positioned the men in a defensive circle. Aiden vanished into the rocks again, seeking high ground from which to strike. The clash was sudden and brutal. Arrows hissed through the air, swords clashed, and the shouts of men filled the plateau. Rune stayed close to the wounded, dragging them back from the fighting when she could. She had no weapon but her will, yet the sight of so much blood and steel hardened her. Every time she looked up, she saw Gideon holding the line, his blade flashing as he drove the Imperials back. He was relentless, a force that refused to bend, but even he could not fight everywhere at once. Rune's stomach twisted each time a soldier fell, knowing the cost of every inch of ground. The enemy pressed harder, trying to break their formation. Rune spotted a group of archers setting up on a ridge that overlooked the plateau. If left unchecked, they would cut the soldiers down with ease. Aiden struck before they could lose a single volley, springing from the shadows with lethal precision. Rune glimpsed the flash of his daggers and the fall of bodies as he cleared the ridge. It gave the company a chance to push forward, but it came at a price. When Aiden returned, blood soaked his sleeve, and his steps faltered. Rune rushed to steady him, but he waved her off, his eyes fixed on the battle below. The fight dragged on until the Imperials began to retreat, leaving their dead scattered across the rocks. The soldiers let out ragged cries of victory, though the triumph felt hollow. Too many of their own lay among the fallen. Gideon ordered the wounded carried into shelter, while the others gathered what supplies they could from the enemy. Rune moved through the aftermath in silence, her mind heavy with the faces of those who would never rise again. She had begun this journey thinking of herself as an outsider, but now the loss of every soldier felt like a blow to her own chest. That night, the company buried their dead in shallow graves, marked by stones. No songs were sung, only silence and the whisper of cold mountain winds. Gideon stood watch long after the others lay down to rest, his silhouette unmoving against the stars. Rune lingered nearby, unable to sleep, her thoughts torn between fear of the path ahead and the strange, unspoken bond forming among those who fought beside her. The mountains were merciless, the enemy unrelenting, yet something stronger was taking root, among them the will to endure, even when the cost grew heavier with every step. Chapter 26. The next morning broke with a gray sky and biting winds. The soldiers stirred slowly, exhaustion etched into their faces after the brutal clash the day before. Rune rose before most, her cloak damp from dew, and found herself watching Gideon as he spoke in hushed tones with his captains. There was no triumph in his voice, only the cold weight of responsibility. They had survived, but survival meant little when so many had been lost. She realized then that leadership was not about glory, but about bearing grief in silence. Gideon carried it all without flinching, and Rune could not look away from the quiet strength in him. Their march resumed with heavy steps. The company moved deeper into the mountains, each man alert to the possibility of another ambush. Rune kept close to Aiden, who masked his injury but could not hide his limp. He brushed off her concern, claiming it was nothing, but she saw the strain in his jaw. The path wound through jagged cliffs where avalanches had left scars of broken rock. Every echo of loose stone sent hearts racing, and Rune felt the paranoia settle deeper into her bones. She hated the constant uncertainty, the knowledge that danger lurked just beyond sight. By midday, scouts returned with troubling news. Imperial riders were shadowing them again, keeping to the ridges but never striking. It was a tactic meant to wear them down, to remind them that escape was impossible. Gideon called a halt and studied the terrain, his gaze sharp as he weighed their options. Retreat was unthinkable, and a pitched battle on the narrow paths would be suicide. Instead, he ordered them to press onward, hoping to reach the river crossing ahead before the Imperials closed the trap. Rune listened to the plan unfold, her chest tightening with each word. The river was their lifeline, but also a point of vulnerability. The company pushed harder, urgency replacing fatigue. Men stumbled but rose again at Gideon's command, spurred on by the promise of reaching safer ground. Rune kept her eyes on the horizon, willing the river to appear. But the enemy did not wait. Near dusk, horns blared from above, and boulders crashed down from the cliffs. Rune screamed a warning as men scattered, some crushed beneath the avalanche of stone. The ambush was merciless, arrows raining from hidden positions as Imperials surged from both sides. The path became chaos, soldiers fighting for footing as well as survival. In the madness, Rune found herself separated from the others. A sword arced toward her, and for a heartbeat she froze. Gideon's blade intercepted the strike, sparks flying as he shoved the attacker back. He caught her arm and pulled her behind him, his voice sharp but steady. "Stay close." Rune's heart hammered as she nodded, clutching her cloak tighter. For a moment, their eyes met his, filled with determination, hers with unspoken fear. Then the battle swallowed them again, tearing them apart, as the line buckled under the weight of the assault. Aiden appeared from the shadows like a phantom, striking at the enemy archers above. His movements were slower, less precise than before, but still deadly. Rune caught glimpses of him as she scrambled to drag a wounded soldier to safety. Blood slicked the stones, screams filled the air, and still Gideon's voice rose above it all, rallying his men to hold formation. The fight stretched into the fading light, a brutal contest of will against numbers. Rune's throat ached from shouting warnings, her hands raw from pulling men back from the brink. She had never been trained for war, yet the chaos was molding her into someone who could not turn away. By nightfall, the company forced the Imperials to retreat once more, though at a staggering cost. The path was littered with bodies, friend and foe alike. Those who remained stood in silence, too weary to cheer, their faces pale with shock. Gideon moved among them, steadying those who faltered, his presence the only thing keeping despair at bay. Rune stayed close to the fire that night, watching him from across the camp. She thought of the fear in her chest when his blade had shielded her, and wondered how long either of them could keep standing against the storm that hunted them. Chapter 27. The company climbed steadily through the mountains, each step more precarious than the last. Loose rocks slid beneath boots, and the cold air burned in their lungs. Rune stayed close to Gideon, watching him scan the ridges ahead with unwavering focus. He said little, but his presence steadied the soldiers, who relied on his calm in the face of constant danger. The mountains were merciless, and every echo of stone or distant howl made hearts race. Suddenly, one of the scouts returned with urgent news. Imperial forces were closing in from 2 directions. The company had little time to react. Gideon immediately ordered the men to spread out, taking advantage of the terrain to create defensive positions. Rune felt her pulse quicken as she helped the wounded move to safety, her hands trembling despite the adrenaline. She caught glimpses of soldiers readying bows, drawing swords, and taking cover behind rocks, their expressions tight with fear and resolve. The attack came without warning. Arrows flew through the gaps in the trees, and soldiers scrambled to avoid them. Gideon moved with precision, shouting orders that cut through the chaos, directing men to hold the line and protect the injured. Rune stayed close, using her magic sparingly to shield those most exposed. Each time she whispered a protective spell, she felt a surge of energy and fear at being discovered. Every action mattered. A single misstep could mean death. Aiden appeared from the shadows, his daggers flashing as he took down attackers before they could release more arrows. Rune marveled at his speed, though she noticed he struggled to maintain the same sharpness as before, his movements slightly slower from exhaustion. The fight was relentless, and the terrain made it brutal. Soldiers were forced to fight in close quarters, the air thick with shouts and the clash of steel. Rune helped where she could, pulling men out of danger and keeping her distance from the most violent clashes. Despite their skill and coordination, the Imperials pressed hard, attempting to flank the company on both sides. Rune spotted a ridge where enemy archers could gain height advantage and immediately warned Gideon. He nodded and signaled Aiden, who dashed silently up the slope, taking down the archers one by one with calculated precision. Rune exhaled in relief when the ridge was secured, but she knew the battle was far from over. Each victory came at a heavy cost. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the Imperials began to retreat, leaving the company bloodied and weary. Many were wounded, and several had fallen. Gideon moved among the survivors, checking on their injuries and issuing quiet orders to keep them moving and regrouped. Rune stayed nearby, attending to the injured and offering what comfort she could. She noticed the exhaustion in Gideon's posture, the tension in Aiden's shoulders, and realized that survival had become more than just staying alive. It was about keeping each other together. Night fell, and the mountains grew quiet once more. Fires burned low, casting long shadows across tired faces. Rune sat beside Gideon, both lost in thought, neither speaking immediately. The events of the day weighed on them, a stark reminder of the cost of their journey. Yet in the stillness, there was a fragile sense of accomplishment. They had endured another test, survived another assault, and while the path ahead remained dangerous, they moved forward together, stronger for having faced the chaos as one. Chapter 28. Dawn broke over the mountains, pale light filtering through the dense canopy. The soldiers moved cautiously, alert for any sign of ambush after the brutal fight the night before. Rune adjusted her cloak, keeping her magic close, aware that one misstep could draw attention. She noticed Gideon leading with careful precision, his eyes scanning every slope, every shadow. Even without speaking, he communicated urgency, and the soldiers followed instinctively, their trust in him growing stronger with every mile. The path narrowed, winding along cliffs that dropped sharply into the valley below. The company slowed, knowing that movement here would be treacherous. Rune kept close to Aiden, who appeared tense but silent, his daggers sheathed but ready. A sudden rustle from above drew their attention. Imperial scouts had spotted them again, moving stealthily along a ridge. Gideon raised a hand, signaling the men to take cover behind rocks and fallen trees. Hearts pounded as the tension thickened. The attack was swift. Arrows rained down from the ridge, forcing the company to crouch low. Rune reacted immediately, casting a protective barrier that deflected several deadly shots. She could feel her strength waning, but she refused to stop. Every life she saved strengthened her resolve. Gideon's commands rose above the chaos, precise and calm, directing soldiers to flank and defend simultaneously. The disciplined response turned potential disaster into a fierce, controlled engagement. Aiden moved like a shadow, taking out the enemy archers before they could cause more damage. Rune noticed that he seemed slower than usual, his body showing the strain of the journey and previous battles. She stayed near him, helping where she could, dragging wounded soldiers out of danger and shielding them with her magic. The clash continued, echoing through the cliffs, until the attackers began to falter, unable to maintain their pressure against Gideon's leadership and the company's coordinated defense. By midday, the remaining Imperials retreated, leaving behind fallen soldiers and discarded weapons. The company regrouped, tending to their wounded and assessing losses. Rune moved from man to man, offering support and quiet encouragement. Each injury reminded her of the cost of survival, and she felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She understood that their strength did not lie in numbers alone, but in their ability to protect one another, to endure together. As the sun climbed higher, Gideon held a council with his captains, deciding the safest route forward. Rune watched, noting how he weighed every choice, considering both the terrain and the well-being of his people. He did not rush. He calculated each step with care. Rune admired his patience and determination, and she felt a deepening respect for the burden he bore. Even in silence, they communicated an unspoken understanding. The journey would be perilous, but they would face it side by side. Night fell once more, and the camp settled into cautious rest. Rune stayed near the fire, attending to the wounded and reflecting on the day's events. The mountains were still and imposing, but the company had survived another test. Gideon's presence was constant and reassuring, and Aiden's quiet vigilance remained a steady force at their side. Despite exhaustion and fear, there was a sense of fragile triumph, another step forward in a journey that promised more danger, but also the strength to endure it together. Chapter 29. The morning was damp and misty, the mountain air carrying a chill that made every breath visible. The company moved slowly, alert to every sound, aware that the Imperials could strike again without warning. Rune stayed near Gideon, her eyes scanning the rocky paths for any sign of movement. He led with a quiet authority, each step measured, and the soldiers around them drew confidence from his calm. Even in silence, he gave them strength, guiding them through the treacherous terrain with unwavering focus. A sudden cry from the scouts echoed across the cliffs. Imperial forces had discovered a shortcut and were attempting to flank the company. Gideon reacted immediately, signaling the men to split into defensive positions. Rune felt the tension spike as soldiers scrambled to take cover behind rocks and boulders. She whispered protective spells under her breath, creating barriers that absorbed some of the incoming arrows. Each movement was deliberate, each decision critical. Failure was not an option. The clash was brutal and fast. Arrows zipped through the mist, and soldiers shouted warnings while striking at the enemy. Rune stayed low, moving through the fray to drag the injured into safer positions. She saw Gideon at the front, his blade cutting down attackers with precise efficiency. Aiden appeared beside her, taking down those who broke through the line, but the strain on his body was evident. Rune caught his gaze briefly, and they shared a silent understanding of how much they had already endured. As the battle pressed on, Rune spotted a ridge where the enemy had gathered for a coordinated strike. She alerted Gideon, who quickly dispatched Aiden and a small group of soldiers to intercept. Rune stayed with the wounded, her hands raw from her magic, heart pounding with every cry of pain or command shouted over the wind. The battle continued for hours, neither side giving way, until the Imperials finally began to retreat, leaving behind the fallen and the exhausted. The company gathered quickly, checking for survivors and tending to injuries. Rune moved among the soldiers, offering both comfort and aid. She could see the relief mixed with exhaustion in their eyes. The toll of the fight weighed heavily on all of them, and even Gideon's stoic demeanor could not mask the fatigue pressing on him. They had survived another encounter, but the cost was painfully clear. By late afternoon, the company found a narrow valley to rest in, hidden from immediate view of the enemy. Fires were lit cautiously, and meals were eaten in silence. Rune found herself sitting close to Gideon, her mind still racing with the events of the morning. The mountains loomed around them, indifferent to their struggles, yet there was a strange sense of accomplishment. They had endured another test together, and each of them had survived through courage, skill, and unspoken trust. As night settled over the peaks, Rune looked toward the distant stars, reflecting on the day's events. Gideon sat near her, sharpening his blade silently, a reminder that the journey was far from over. Aiden rested beside the fire, his eyes half closed but ever watchful. Despite exhaustion, fear, and loss, a bond had solidified among them. They had survived yet another trial, and while the mountains promised more danger ahead, there was a quiet understanding that together they could face whatever came next. Chapter 30. The journey into the capital's outskirts began under heavy skies, the threat of rain adding weight to every step. Rune kept her hood low, her senses sharp, knowing eyes could be watching from every window and alley. Gideon walked at her side, his posture controlled but alert, as though every shadow might spring to life. The soldiers behind them moved in silence, aware that one wrong move could expose them. The city was no longer the bustling place it once had been. It felt suffocated, haunted by the grip of imperial control. Rune's heart pounded as she scanned the faces they passed. Some villagers lowered their heads, avoiding eye contact, while others risked quick glances that carried both fear and hope. She whispered to Gideon that these people might become allies if given the chance. He acknowledged her words with the faintest nod, but reminded her in a low tone that one false move could also mean betrayal. The tension between trust and caution pressed heavily on them both, shaping every decision as they pressed deeper into hostile ground. Trouble struck sooner than expected. A group of Imperial guards emerged at the corner of the main square, their armor catching the dim light. Rune froze for a moment, but Gideon pulled her closer, whispering that they must act natural, blend in, and not draw attention. The guards began questioning passers-by, demanding names and proof of loyalty. Rune gripped Gideon's sleeve as the line of questioning drew nearer. One soldier's eyes lingered on her, suspicion flickering there, and for a breathless moment it seemed discovery was certain. Then a distraction came from an unlikely source. A street vendor loudly accused a boy of stealing bread, drawing the guard's attention away. Gideon seized the moment, steering Rune into a side street with calm precision. They slipped into the narrow passage, leaving the commotion behind, but Rune's pulse did not slow. She whispered her gratitude, both to Gideon and to whatever force had intervened. Gideon said little, though his hand lingered briefly at her elbow, grounding her before he pulled away again. They regrouped with the others in a shadowed courtyard, where Gideon gave sharp orders to spread out in pairs, gathering information without attracting notice. Rune volunteered to move with Aiden, whose familiarity with the capital's layout would make navigation easier. Gideon hesitated before agreeing, and for a brief moment his eyes held hers, as if warning her to stay cautious. She nodded, promising silently that she would not falter. It was not just her safety at stake, it was the mission, the rebellion, and every soul waiting for freedom. Moving with Aiden through the narrow lanes, Rune saw the truth of the Empire's cruelty more clearly than ever. Shops boarded up, families begging for scraps, and soldiers patrolling with cold indifference. At one point, a child tugged at Rune's cloak, asking quietly if she had food. Rune's throat tightened, and though Aiden urged her to keep moving, she slipped the child a small piece of bread. The gratitude in the child's eyes burned into her memory, a reminder of what they were truly fighting for. Aiden muttered that such risks could get them killed, but Rune only whispered that small kindnesses mattered just as much as battles. By evening, the group reunited in a hidden cellar beneath an abandoned inn. Reports came in troop movements, whispers of new imperial strategies, and rumors of prisoners held in the citadel. Rune listened carefully, realizing how much danger surrounded them, but also how much hope still lingered in the hearts of the oppressed. Gideon stood at the head of the group, his voice steady as he spoke of the next step. Every word carried weight, not only as orders, but as a promise that their sacrifices would not be in vain. As night deepened, Rune lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling of the cellar. Gideon rested nearby, sharpening his blade in silence. Their eyes met once in the dim firelight, and no words were spoken, yet something passed between them. A recognition of the risks, the fear, and the quiet determination to keep moving forward. The city was dangerous, the Empire relentless, but together they had endured. Tomorrow would demand even more of them, but for now, in this fragile quiet, there was the faintest spark of hope. Chapter 31. The next day broke under a gray and watchful sky. From the safety of the cellar, Rune could hear the faint toll of the city bells, marking another day of imperial rule. Gideon was already awake, his cloak drawn tightly, as he studied the map spread before him. He spoke in low tones to Aiden and the other soldiers, outlining where patrols were thickest and where supply lines might be vulnerable. Rune watched the quiet determination in his movements, feeling the weight of his responsibility. He carried not just their lives in his decisions, but the hope of the rebellion itself. Their objective was clear. Word had spread of prisoners locked within the citadel, among them figures who could be crucial to their cause if rescued. Rune insisted that they could not leave those people behind. Aiden agreed, though he voiced concerns about the risk. Gideon listened without interruption, his jaw tight, before concluding that the mission had to move forward. The debate ended not because the risks were dismissed, but because the alternative, abandoning allies to imperial chains, was unthinkable. Disguises were prepared before the group split again. Rune wrapped herself in plain clothing, hiding her face beneath a worn scarf, while Gideon took on the appearance of a common laborer. They joined the bustle of the market, where stalls were lined with poor offerings, and eyes darted nervously at every guard's approach. Moving among the crowd, Rune whispered observations to Gideon about the placement of soldiers and the mood of the people. Every word was a reminder of how tightly the Empire's grip had strangled the capital. Trouble brewed as a patrol crossed their path, demanding that all civilians show proof of residence. Rune's hands trembled beneath her scarf, but Gideon's calm steadied her. When a guard questioned them directly, Gideon spun a quick lie about delivering supplies to the northern barracks. His voice was firm, his stance unshaken, and after a long pause, the guards moved on. Rune exhaled a breath she had been holding, whispering that he had nearly sounded too convincing. Gideon gave her a faint smirk, though the tension in his eyes betrayed how close they had come to being discovered. Their scouting eventually brought them close enough to see the citadel's high walls looming against the horizon. Black banners of the Empire fluttered above its towers, a grim reminder of the power that awaited inside. Rune's stomach twisted at the sight, but Gideon's voice was steady as he mapped out potential entry points. Aiden arrived with news of hidden tunnels rumored to run beneath the fortress, once used by smugglers before the Empire seized the city. The plan took shape, fragile but promising, and every pair of eyes in the group fixed on Gideon for the final word. That night, as they returned to the cellar, Rune could not shake the unease pressing at her chest. She replayed the faces of those they had seen in the market, the hungry, the broken, the fearful, and wondered how much longer the people could endure. Gideon noticed her silence and asked softly if she regretted coming here. Rune met his gaze, answering that she would rather risk everything than live another day watching the Empire's cruelty unchecked. For a brief moment, the sharpness in Gideon's expression softened, though he quickly looked away, returning to the blade he always seemed to sharpen. As the company settled for the night, whispers of doubt and determination rippled among them. Some prayed quietly, others clutched tokens of family left behind. Rune sat with her back against the stone wall, her hands wrapped around the last of her strength. She thought of the prisoners in the citadel, of the child she had fed in the market, of every life depending on their rebellion. Across from her, Gideon stood with his arms crossed, keeping watch. Their eyes met once more, and though no words were exchanged, Rune felt the silent promise that they would see this mission through together. The city slept uneasily above them, unaware of the plan taking shape in its shadows. The citadel loomed over their thoughts, an unbroken fortress of steel and stone. Yet, in the damp cellar, among the rebels who refused to yield, there burned a fragile spark that even the Empire's might could not extinguish. Chapter 32. The city was alive with movement at dawn, its narrow streets already crowded with merchants, laborers, and patrols. From the shadows of an alley, Rune studied the rhythm of the soldiers guarding the outer wall of the citadel. Their numbers were heavy at the gates, but the back alleys revealed gaps in their watch. Gideon stood close behind her, his presence steady, as Aiden whispered that they had found signs of the hidden tunnel the smugglers once used. It would not be easy to access, but it was their best chance to slip inside without alerting the entire garrison. Rune followed as the group wound through a series of twisting streets, the smell of smoke and stale bread hanging in the air. The people they passed kept their heads down, avoiding eye contact with the rebels, fearful of the Empire's punishments for even a glance of disobedience. The tension in the city pressed against her chest, but she forced herself to focus on every word Gideon spoke. His instructions were short and precise, meant to keep them alive in case the guards uncovered them. They finally reached a ruined tavern at the edge of the district. Beneath its broken floorboards, half hidden by rubble, Aidan uncovered the entrance to the tunnel. The air reeked of damp earth as the group descended into darkness. Rune lit a faint glow with her magic, the soft shimmer guiding their path. The narrow passage forced them close, every sound echoing off the stone, every step reminding them of the danger of discovery. Gideon took the lead, blade drawn, while Rune brought up the middle to shield the weaker members of the company. The tunnel twisted downward, rough and uneven, until the faint hum of voices carried from ahead. Gideon raised a hand, signaling silence. Torchlight flickered against the walls, revealing a small band of Imperials guarding a supply entrance into the citadel. Rune's heart pounded as the group pressed into the shadows. Gideon moved like a shadow himself, striking swiftly and silently. Rune whispered incantations to dampen the noise of clashing steel, while Aidan cut down those who tried to raise the alarm. Within moments, the guards lay motionless, and the tunnel opened into the lower chambers of the fortress. Inside, the air was colder, laced with the scent of iron and ash. Rune could feel the power of the Empire's presence radiating through the walls. They moved cautiously, weaving through storerooms stacked with weapons and supplies. At every turn, the fear of discovery weighed heavily, but Gideon's voice guided them onward. He spoke little, only when necessary, but his resolve anchored the group. Rune noticed how even the most nervous soldiers straightened when he glanced their way, as though his calm alone kept them steady. As they paused in the shadows of a stairwell, Rune leaned close to him and whispered that they could not hesitate if they found prisoners inside. Gideon's expression hardened, yet his reply was gentle. They would not abandon anyone if it was within their power to save them. Rune drew strength from that promise, clutching it tightly as they prepared to ascend deeper into the citadel. The sound of armored boots echoed faintly above, a reminder of how close they were to danger. They pressed on, step by careful step, until the stone stairway delivered them to a heavy door marked with the sigil of the Empire. Beyond it lay the upper levels, where the prisoners were rumored to be kept. Rune touched the cold metal and closed her eyes for a heartbeat, gathering her strength. Gideon stood beside her, his hand firm on the hilt of his sword, his silence filled with determination. Together they pushed forward, the weight of the mission pressing heavily on every breath they took. The deeper they went, the more the citadel seemed to close in around them, its walls like a beast waiting to strike. Yet even in that suffocating darkness, there was a sense of unity among them. Each step, each choice, bound them closer, not only as rebels fighting for survival, but as people who had chosen to stake everything against the Empire's tyranny. Chapter 33. The group moves deeper inside the citadel, every sense on edge. The narrow passageways above the storerooms led into broader stone corridors lit by torches, their flames casting long, menacing shadows across the walls. Rune's magic still glowed faintly, carefully controlled to avoid drawing attention, but the weight of silence pressed heavily upon them. They all knew that one misstep could bring dozens of Imperial soldiers down on their heads. Gideon walked at the front, his posture rigid but calm, his eyes scanning every corner as though he had walked this fortress 100 times before. The rebels halted when Aidan raised his hand, pointing toward a junction ahead. From the right passage came the sound of boots, steady, disciplined, and growing closer. They quickly ducked into an alcove, pressing themselves against the damp stone. Rune whispered a charm of concealment, wrapping shadows tighter around them. But even as she did, her pulse hammered in her throat. Through the half-open doorway ahead, a small squad of Imperials marched past, their armor glinting in the torchlight. For a breathless moment, Rune feared one of them would glance sideways and pierce the veil of her magic. But the soldiers moved on, oblivious, leaving only the fading sound of metal striking stone. Once the way was clear, Gideon signaled for them to continue. The group slipped out, making their way toward the upper prison levels. Rune noticed how the walls grew harsher, the deeper they climbed, less decorated, more functional, built for intimidation rather than beauty. Chains hung from the ceilings in some of the side chambers they passed, and in others, racks of supplies hinted at cruel interrogations carried out within these walls. Every sight filled Rune with anger, her determination hardening with each step. As they turned a corner, they encountered their first true obstacle: a reinforced gate guarded by two heavily armed soldiers. Unlike the patrols, these men stood alert, their posture betraying no fatigue. Gideon's eyes flicked to Rune, and she understood instantly stealth would not suffice here. They needed speed and precision. In one swift movement, Gideon surged forward, his blade flashing in the torchlight. Rune followed with a whispered incantation, sending a wave of disorientation through the guards. The rebels struck with practiced coordination, and within moments the soldiers fell, their bodies lowered silently to the ground. The gate creaked open, revealing the prison corridors. The air here was damp and fetid, thick with the scent of blood, sweat, and despair. Rows of cells lined the walls, some occupied by shadowy figures that stirred weakly at the sound of footsteps. Rune's breath caught as she realized how many prisoners the Empire had hidden away. Some were rebels like themselves, others perhaps ordinary citizens who had dared to speak against tyranny. A heavy silence settled over the group as they looked upon the suffering etched into every face behind the iron bars. Aidan rushed forward to check the locks, his hands already working at the rusted mechanisms. Gideon ordered two of the rebels to keep watch at the corridor's ends, ensuring no soldiers stumbled upon them mid-rescue. Rune knelt beside a young woman whose wrists were raw from shackles. She murmured gentle words of reassurance as she worked to ease the bindings with her magic. The woman's wide, hollow eyes slowly filled with a flicker of hope, a reminder of why they had risked everything to breach the citadel. One by one, the cells were opened, and the freed prisoners staggered into the corridor. Their voices were hoarse, their movements slow, but gratitude shone through their exhaustion. Rune felt the weight of the moment sink deep into her chest. The Empire had tried to erase these people, yet here they stood, alive and unbroken. Gideon's command was steady as he urged them to remain quiet and prepare to move quickly. He knew the escape would be even harder than the entry, and their window of time was rapidly closing. The chapter closes with the rebels and the rescued prisoners gathering in the shadows of the prison corridor. Gideon's hand rested on the hilt of his sword, his eyes fixed on the stairway leading upward, where more guards surely waited. Rune drew closer to him, her resolve as strong as ever. They had come too far to falter now. Together, with their fragile hope rekindled, they prepared to fight their way out of the Empire's stronghold. Chapter 34. The escape began in silence, but quickly spiraled into chaos. The group led the rescued prisoners through the twisting corridors of the citadel, their footsteps muffled by haste and fear. Rune kept her magic alive around them, weaving shadows to cloak their movement, but the strain gnawed at her. The air was stifling, heavy with the scent of rust and torch smoke, and every corner held the threat of discovery. Gideon guided them with unwavering calm, his hand steady on his blade, his voice low but commanding as he directed them toward the outer halls. A shout rang out before they could reach the stairwell. One of the prisoners, weakened and disoriented, had stumbled against a fallen torch. The clatter echoed like thunder through the stone corridors. Within moments, the alarm was raised. Horns blared, and the tramp of armored boots thundered above and below. Gideon barked orders, his voice sharp with urgency, and the rebels formed a defensive line to shield the freed captives. Rune's pulse spiked as she called upon her magic, threads of fire bursting from her palms to drive back the first wave of approaching guards. The narrow passage became a battlefield. Steel clashed with steel, sparks flew as blades struck shields, and the cries of wounded men filled the air. Aidan fought like a storm at Gideon's side, his movements swift despite the exhaustion etched on his face. Rune darted between fighters, hurling bursts of flame and barriers of force to keep the enemy at bay. The prisoners huddled close, clutching each other in terror, while the rebels pushed forward with desperate determination. The citadel's stone walls shook with the violence of the clash, and the escape teetered on the edge of collapse. Amid the chaos, Rune spotted a squad of archers lining the upper balcony, their bows raised, aiming directly at the cluster of captives below. With no time to warn the others, Rune flung herself forward, chanting rapidly as she summoned a shimmering dome of energy. The arrows rained down, shattering harmlessly against her barrier. The effort drained her instantly, her knees buckling, but Gideon was there in an instant, pulling her back to her feet. His eyes met hers with fierce intensity, silently promising that they would survive this together. The rebels surged forward, breaking through the tightening ranks of guards. Every step was a struggle, but slowly, with blood and grit, they carved a path toward the courtyard. Rune's hands burned, her throat raw from incantations, yet she refused to falter. She thought of the prisoners behind them, of the Empire's cruelty, of the hope that still burned despite the darkness. That fire pushed her onward, guiding her magic with renewed force. At last, they burst through the final archway into the open air of the courtyard. The night sky stretched above them, lit by torches and the glow of distant fires, but freedom was still out of reach. Rows of Imperial soldiers poured into the yard, cutting off their escape. The rebels tightened their ranks around the prisoners, their breaths ragged, weapons slick with blood. Gideon raised his blade high, his voice carrying across the din, urging them to stand fast one more time. Rune steadied herself at his side, her magic sparking dangerously in her palms. With tension at its peak, the rebels and prisoners trapped in the heart of the Empire's stronghold, surrounded on all sides. The next clash was inevitable, and every life hung in the balance. Chapter 35. The morning after the skirmish, the group pushed deeper into Imperial lands, the air thick with tension. Rune kept close to Gideon, her eyes scanning the narrow paths between jagged cliffs. The mountains felt hostile, the silence broken only by the crunch of boots and the occasional call of a bird overhead. Every step brought them closer to the chamber where the stolen artifact was rumored to be kept, but also closer to danger. Gideon's leadership was steady, his commands calm, though Rune could see the strain hidden beneath his composure. His eyes often flicked toward the shadows, as if expecting an ambush at any moment. As the day stretched on, scouts reported movement ahead. Rune instinctively placed her hand on the hilt of her dagger, while whispering a protection charm under her breath. Gideon signaled the company to halt, crouching low to assess the terrain. The faint clatter of armor echoed from the rocks ahead, confirming their fears. Imperial forces were not only near, they were waiting. Rune glanced at Gideon, reading the steel in his expression, and understood that this confrontation was unavoidable. Their mission could not continue without breaking through. The enemy struck swiftly. Soldiers surged from behind boulders, arrows raining down from hidden ledges. Gideon shouted for the company to spread wide, taking control of the chaos. Rune felt the surge of her magic course through her as she lifted a barrier, deflecting incoming bolts aimed at the wounded. The clash was violent, steel striking steel, shouts mingling with the roar of combat. Aiden appeared beside her again, his blade swinging with precision, though his movements carried the weight of exhaustion. Rune steadied him with a burst of protective light, and he gave her a quick nod before diving back into the fray. Amid the chaos, Rune spotted a cluster of Imperial soldiers protecting a sealed chest, their movements desperate and defensive. She called out to Gideon, who locked eyes with her instantly. He moved with purpose, carving his way toward the group, Rune at his side. Together they fought through, their movements synchronized, almost instinctual. Rune's spells lanced through the air, shattering shields and breaking enemy formations, while Gideon's sword cut with ruthless efficiency. By the time they reached the chest, the defenders had fallen, their resistance broken by the relentless assault. When Gideon broke the seal, the chest revealed only a decoy artifact. Frustration rippled through the soldiers, and Rune's stomach sank at the realization that the Imperials had anticipated their move. "They're leading us in circles," she muttered, her voice sharp with anger. Gideon pressed a firm hand to her shoulder, steadying her. "Then we adapt," he replied, his tone calm yet edged with determination. The soldiers around them regained focus at his words, though the weariness of constant battle was evident in their eyes. The company regrouped quickly, dragging the wounded back to safety. Rune worked tirelessly, her hands raw from channeling healing magic, exhaustion biting at the edges of her strength. The air smelled of blood and smoke, a grim reminder of what they had endured. Gideon moved among the men, offering brief words of encouragement, his presence alone enough to bolster them. Rune noticed the subtle shift where once they followed him out of duty, now they followed out of trust. His leadership had become their lifeline. By nightfall, they found a shallow cave for shelter, its walls damp and cold but hidden from view. Fires flickered faintly as soldiers tended wounds and shared what little food remained. Rune sat apart at first, her mind heavy with doubt. Gideon approached, sitting close enough that their shoulders brushed. "You held the line today," he said quietly. She met his gaze, seeing sincerity in his expression, and for a moment the weight of the day eased. Their silence was not empty, but filled with unspoken acknowledgement of what they had endured together. As the night deepened, Rune rested with her back against the stone wall, her thoughts drifting between fear and resolve. Gideon remained nearby, sharpening his blade methodically, his presence steady and grounding. The soldiers dozed in uneasy sleep, their faces etched with fatigue. Rune closed her eyes, knowing tomorrow would bring more trials, but also knowing she was not facing them alone. For the first time, despite the constant threat, she felt a fragile thread of hope binding them together. Chapter 36. At dawn, the company resumed their march, their bodies weary, but their resolve sharpened. The mountains gave way to steep ridges and narrow passes, each turn feeling like a trap. Rune walked close to Gideon, her senses straining for any sign of danger. The Imperials had grown cunning, leaving false trails and setting traps meant to bleed them slowly. A misstep could cost them dearly, and every soldier knew it. The silence between Rune and Gideon was heavy, not from distance, but from shared determination. Midway through the climb, a scout stumbled back, blood streaking his face as he gasped out a warning. Before anyone could respond, a storm of arrows descended from the cliffs. Soldiers shouted, Shields rose and chaos tore through the ranks. Gideon's orders cut through the noise, directing groups to form a defensive wedge. Rune's magic shimmered into existence, a protective barrier that flickered with strain under the relentless assault. Her arms ached, but she pushed harder, feeling the sting of each impact reverberate through her body. The enemy pressed their advantage, rushing down the slopes in a coordinated strike. Gideon met them head-on, his blade flashing in the dim light. Rune caught sight of him carving a path through the chaos, his every move calculated yet desperate. She followed his lead, unleashing bursts of energy that sent soldiers sprawling. At her side, Aiden fought with grim determination, his strikes slower, but no less lethal. The clash stretched long, and the line wavered, but the company held, refusing to give ground. Rune noticed the Imperials circling to cut off their retreat. She shouted the warning, her voice hoarse, and Gideon spun immediately to counter. Rallying the men, he drove them forward, breaking through the encirclement with sheer force and precision. Rune matched his pace, her magic flaring wildly, draining her strength to keep the enemy at bay. Together, they carved an escape path, pulling the company free from what could have been total annihilation. The cost, however, was steep, with too many left wounded or dead on the stone. When the fighting ceased, Rune sank to her knees, her breath ragged. Blood streaked her hands, not all of it her own, and her body trembled with exhaustion. Gideon stood over her, his chest heaving, his sword dripping. He offered his hand, pulling her to her feet. Their eyes locked for a brief moment, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. Survival had come at a terrible price, but neither could have endured without the other. That connection lingered even as soldiers around them regrouped in silence. The company pushed onward until they found refuge in a hollow carved into the cliffs. The air inside was damp and suffocating, but it provided shelter. Rune moved among the injured, whispering healing charms despite her fatigue. Gideon remained near the entrance, a silent sentinel scanning the path behind them. Aiden joined him, exchanging a few words, both men aware that more enemies would come. Inside the cave, the soldiers sat in uneasy silence, the weight of loss pressing heavily on their shoulders. As the fires flickered, Rune finally allowed herself to sit, her back against the cold stone. Gideon approached, lowering himself beside her without a word. For a long moment, neither spoke, the sounds of soldiers sleeping filling the cave. At last, he murmured, "We can't falter now. They'll break us if we do." Rune met his gaze, her lips curling faintly despite the exhaustion. "Then, we don't break." The simple exchange carried more weight than any speech, binding them in shared resolve. The night dragged on, restless and heavy. Rune dreamed only of shadows and blood, her mind replaying the chaos of the day. Yet when she stirred awake, she found Gideon still at his post, blade across his lap, eyes sharp even in the dim firelight. That quiet steadiness anchored her more than words ever could. Despite the looming threat, despite the pain of loss, she closed her eyes again, holding on to that fragile thread of reassurance as the mountains loomed in silence. Chapter 37. The next morning, the cave was cold, their breaths misting in the faint glow of dawn. The soldiers moved quietly, packing their supplies with a heaviness that came from both exhaustion and grief. Rune felt the weariness settling deep in her bones, but she refused to let it slow her. She stayed close to Gideon, whose voice carried calm authority as he ordered the company into formation. Outside, the mountains stretched endless and foreboding, each ridge a reminder of how far they still had to go. Their march was cut short when they stumbled upon a village nestled in the cliffs. The people were wary, retreating into their homes as the armed company entered. Suspicion lingered in every glance, and Rune could sense their fear. Gideon spoke with the village elders, his tone respectful yet firm. Supplies were desperately needed, and he made it clear they would trade fairly. Rune watched the exchange, noting how his words balanced authority with restraint, a rare blend that earned the villagers grudging cooperation. While Gideon negotiated, Rune walked among the villagers, trying to soothe their unease. She noticed how some of them bore marks of imperial cruelty, burned homes, missing kin, and eyes that carried deep sorrow. One woman whispered to Rune about soldiers passing through only days before, demanding allegiance and leaving threats in their wake. Rune's heart clenched, realizing that the war stretched far beyond their battles. These people lived every day under the shadow of fear. As food and water were gathered, Aiden kept a watchful eye, his hand never far from his blade. He pulled Rune aside, his voice low. "This peace won't hold long. If the Imperials return and find us here, we'll drag these people into ruin." Rune nodded, torn between the need for rest and the risk of endangering innocence. When she relayed this to Gideon, he gave a curt nod, already aware of the danger. They had no choice but to move on quickly, even if their bodies cried out for respite. Trouble came sooner than expected. Scouts rushed back to report Imperial banners spotted on the horizon. Panic rippled through the village as families hurried to hide their children. Gideon wasted no time, ordering the company to prepare for immediate departure. Rune stayed behind for a moment, helping a mother calm her frightened child. "Stay strong," she whispered, brushing the girl's hair from her eyes. "Darkness doesn't last forever." Then she turned back, her heart heavy as she rejoined the soldiers. The company slipped out of the village through narrow trails, the sound of approaching hooves echoing against the stone. Rune casts protective wards along their path, hoping to delay pursuit. Aiden guided them through a hidden pass he had scouted earlier, every step taking them further from the village. Behind them, faint shouts carried on the wind, a chilling reminder of the danger they had narrowly avoided. Rune clenched her fists, guilt gnawing at her for leaving the villagers vulnerable. When they finally halted in a sheltered canyon, Gideon allowed the soldiers a brief rest. Rune sat beside him, her eyes still haunted. "We left them to face the Empire alone," she murmured. Gideon's expression was hard, but his voice softened. "We can't save everyone, Rune. If we fall here, who will fight for the rest?" His words were steady, yet she could see the weight of the decision pressing on him too. In that moment, she realized how much he carried not just as a commander, but as a man. Night descended, and the fires burned low. The soldiers ate in silence, their minds heavy with the day's escape. Rune lingered near the flames, staring into the embers as thoughts of the villagers haunted her. Gideon's presence beside her was grounding, though he said little. Their silence spoke louder than words, a quiet acknowledgement of both their guilt and their determination. Tomorrow would bring more battles, more choices that tore at the heart. But for now, survival was enough. Chapter 38. The canyon was eerily quiet at dawn, a thin mist curling along the jagged rocks. The soldiers stirred awake, their bodies stiff from sleeping on cold stone. Rune rose before most, her breath steady as she checked her wards, ensuring the trail they left was still shielded from Imperial scouts. She felt the drain of magic in her bones, but pushed through, knowing the company's safety depended on her vigilance. Gideon's steady presence at the center of the camp brought order, his voice calm as he directed the men to prepare for another grueling march. They set off into the winding passes, the air thinner as they climbed higher into the mountains. The path narrowed dangerously, forcing them into single file, and the silence between them grew heavier with each step. Rune walked close behind Gideon, her eyes darting to the cliffs above where falling rocks or ambushes could come without warning. She noticed how often he scanned the terrain, always alert, always ready. His vigilance reminded her that danger could strike at any moment, and their survival depended on staying one step ahead. By midday, the company reached a plateau that overlooked a wide valley. It should have been a place of relief, open and expansive after the confinement of the mountain trails. Instead, the sight of smoke in the distance sent a chill through them all. A village lay in ruin, blackened timbers still smoldering, the aftermath of another imperial raid. The soldiers muttered uneasily, the reality of their enemy's cruelty etched plainly in the destruction. Rune's throat tightened as she realized families had lived there only days before. Gideon ordered a cautious approach. The company spread out, weapons ready, scanning for survivors or lingering threats. Rune moved through the charred remains of homes, her boots crunching over ash and broken pottery. She spotted a small handprint burned into a wall and paused, her chest aching at the thought of a child trapped in the flames. Aiden approached quietly, his jaw tight. "This is what we're fighting to end," he said grimly. Rune nodded, anger flaring beneath her grief, fueling her resolve to press forward. Near the center of the village, they found a handful of survivors hiding in a collapsed cellar. The men were weak, the women clutching children who stared with wide, frightened eyes. Rune knelt to comfort them, offering water and gentle words. Gideon assured the survivors they would be safe under his protection for the time being. But one of the men, shaking with rage, told them the Imperials had moved further north after the raid, leaving devastation in their wake. The news was vital proof that the Empire was expanding deeper into the region and cutting off escape routes. The soldiers quickly worked to provide aid. Food was shared, wounds tended, and temporary shelters built. Rune used her magic to ease pain where she could, though her strength waned with every spell. She noticed how the survivors looked to Gideon with cautious hope, as if sensing his ability to lead them through despair. The responsibility pressed on him, but he bore it silently, never allowing weakness to show. Watching him, Rune felt both admiration and a heavy sorrow for the burden he carried. As evening fell, Gideon made the difficult decision. They could not stay with the survivors long, but abandoning them was equally unthinkable. A plan was formed to escort them partway to a safer settlement, hidden deeper in the mountains. The soldiers accepted the choice without question, though their exhaustion was evident. Rune stayed with the children, telling them soft stories to distract them from their fear. For the first time in days, their small laughter rose into the smoky air, a fragile reminder of life persisting in the shadows of war. That night, as the fires burned low, Rune and Gideon sat apart from the company. Neither spoke at first, both weighed down by the day's discovery. Finally, Rune broke the silence. "How many more villages like this will there be before it ends?" Gideon's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon, his voice quiet but firm. "Too many. But we will keep moving, keep fighting. Because if we stop, this is all the Empire will leave behind." Rune listened, her heart heavy but steadied by his resolve. In that moment, the bond between them deepened, built on shared grief and the determination to endure. Chapter 39. The march with the survivors began at first light, the company adjusting its pace to accommodate the weakest among them. The children tired quickly, and the soldiers took turns carrying them, their hardened faces softening as little hands clung to their shoulders. Rune stayed close, offering warmth and encouragement, though each step pulled more energy from her already drained body. Gideon moved at the front, setting a steady pace, his eyes constantly scanning for signs of ambush. The weight of responsibility hung over him heavier than ever. Every life with them was his to safeguard. The path wound higher into the mountains, the terrain growing harsher with jagged rocks and narrow ledges. Loose gravel slid underfoot, threatening to send the unsteady tumbling. More than once, Gideon's hand shot out to steady a survivor, his strength anchoring them when fear nearly paralyzed their steps. Rune followed close behind, watching how he bore the strain of leadership without complaint. She could see the fatigue in the set of his shoulders, yet his determination never faltered. His endurance became the company's backbone, holding them together as the climb grew more punishing. By midday, they reached a cliffside path that overlooked a sharp ravine. Crossing it required silence and caution, for the sound of falling stones might alert patrols. The survivors hesitated, their eyes wide with terror at the dizzying drop. Rune walked among them, murmuring reassurance, steadying trembling hands as they stepped forward one by one. The soldiers formed a living wall along the narrow edge, guiding and shielding the civilians until the last of them crossed safely. Only then did Gideon allow himself a brief breath of relief, though his gaze never left the horizon. Scouts returned with troubling news. An Imperial patrol had been spotted trailing their path not far behind. The company was faced with a grim decision: slow down to keep the survivors safe and risk capture, or press forward at a pace that could break the weakest among them. The debate was brief, for Gideon's choice was clear: they would not abandon those in their care. Instead, he ordered the formation of a rearguard, men who would watch the trail and buy time if the enemy drew too close. The soldiers accepted without hesitation, their loyalty to him unshaken. The tension grew with each hour. Rune could feel the weight of pursuit pressing down on them, an invisible hand urging them faster. She reinforced wards along their trail, though the effort left her pale and trembling. Gideon noticed her faltering steps and placed a steadying hand on her arm. "Save your strength," he said softly, his voice carrying both command and concern. She met his eyes, drawing strength from the unwavering certainty she found there, and pushed forward, refusing to show weakness. As dusk settled, they reached a sheltered valley, where an abandoned watchpost stood crumbling among the rocks. It offered temporary refuge, and Gideon ordered the company to rest. Fires were lit sparingly, hidden under overhangs to avoid detection. The survivors huddled close, exhausted beyond words. Rune tended to the children again, her voice weaving gentle tales that softened their fear. Gideon spoke quietly with his captains, planning routes for the days ahead, and setting watches to guard against pursuit. The burden of command never left him, even in these rare moments of stillness. That night, danger came closer. From the cliffs above, faint torchlight flickered, Imperials moving in the dark, scouting the paths. The company froze, every breath held as they listened to the distant clatter of armor and stone. Rune pressed her hands to the earth, weaving a muffling ward that cloaked their presence. The strain nearly overwhelmed her, sweat streaking her face as her magic thinned. Gideon knelt beside her, one hand braced on his sword, his other steadying her trembling shoulder. They endured the long hours of silence until, at last, the torches faded into the distance. When dawn came, the company moved again, their pace sharpened by the narrow escape. The mountains stretched endlessly before them, harsh and unforgiving, but there was no choice except to keep walking. The survivors, though weary, found courage in the protection surrounding them. Gideon led them forward with quiet determination, his figure a constant reminder of resilience. Rune followed at his side, her spirit bound tighter to his with every hardship they shared. Together, they pressed deeper into the wilderness, carrying with them both the fragile hope of survival and the relentless shadow of pursuit. Chapter 40. They arrive at the New Republic's docks under heavy gray skies, rain slipping off the wooden planks. Rune feels both relief and dread relief that they've made land, dread because nothing here is safe. Gideon walks beside her, carrying their packs, edge of fear in his eyes. Rune notices how empty the streets feel, how people hurry inside when they see Bloodguard uniforms. They disembark onto the wharf. The sea smells sharp and briny, mingled with wet wood and salt. Rune tests the air, casting Ghost Walker before stepping off the dock, invisible or at least hidden enough. Gideon had insisted on it. She feels exposed but steadied by the spell. They enter the busy city streets, crowded stalls offering fish, fabrics, noises clashing. Rune breathes in a mix of rain and commerce. For a moment, she lets herself feel home. Wintersea house memories, gardens, laughter, but the thought is sharp because Wintersea is no longer hers. Noah Creed has taken Wintersea House. Rune realizes she can't return there freely. When she learns her things, books, clothes, belongings are claimed by Creed. Fury flares. Gideon tries to calm her. He offers his small apartment as temporary refuge. Rune steps inside, finding it modest, personal. Bookshelves with worn volumes, a deer figurine carved from pale wood catches her eye. Gideon tells her it belonged to his dead sister Tessa. Rune touches it, feeling something fragile and warm, seeing Gideon's past in it. The object becomes a point of connection. Guilt, memory, love, loss, all wrapped in its curves. The mood shifts abruptly. Bangs at the door. Rune stares at Gideon, his shirt unbuttoned, feet bare. He tells her soldiers are pounding the doors not to find her, but him. She hides upstairs, perched on roof tiles, clutching a suitcase, heart in her throat. Through an open window, she watches 2 Bloodguard soldiers arrest Gideon, bind his hands, force him out, dragging him toward the palace. Rune is frozen. Shock, fear, betrayal swirl inside her. She realizes how dangerous trusting this city is, how quickly sanctuary can become a trap. Down below, soldiers search Gideon's apartment. Rune braces. Her mind races with memories of past betrayals, past times he saved her, handed her over, loved her, betrayed her. She creeps across the roof, watching shadows move. Under moonlight, she sees 3 names carved into the roofing tiles. Tessa, Alex, Gideon. Memories of the Sharpe siblings raise sibling love, loss, guilt, everything that binds Gideon's past to hers. It makes her heart ache for safety that never truly was. Realization hits. Gideon didn't just get arrested because of something he did. It's also about what he didn't do, his indecision, his protection, his choices to spare, protect, love when many would be destroyed. Rune feels both fear for him and anger. Anger that she may need to save him. Anger that even here, his past fails to chase him. She watches the Bloodguard horses ride off with him, the echo of hooves fading, then lowers to the tiles, breathing in the night air, lonely, resolute. She lets the deer figurine fall softly into her lap, its warm, pale wood against her palm. She steadies herself with it, remembering that connection to Gideon and to his family. She knows she must act. Sleep may come later. For now, she must plan. Because Gideon's capture changes everything. It means the balance of power shifts, as much by what is done as what is left undone. In the moonlight she stands, glancing at the city skyline, wet rooftops, distant torches, empty alleys. She cannot go down yet. Not until she knows where they'll take Gideon, how many guards flank him, and what the Empire intends. The risk is greater now, and there is no going back. The plan must change, and Rune knows she will change it. Chapter 41. Rune and Aurelia arrive at a small harbor where Alex's sailboat, Dawn's Aria, is anchored. The place is swarming with Bloodguard soldiers. Meadow hides with Aurelia nearby, while Rune goes to check on the boat quietly, careful not to draw attention. She drops into the cold water and swims to Dawn's Aria, sneaking aboard while trying to stay unseen. Her wet feet slide on the wood planks, and she realizes she has forgotten Gideon's pistol. It must have fallen into the water. It's now lost. Moving below decks, Rune finds a barrel full of fresh water. Relief floods her. If Alex has supplied enough water, they might survive the voyage. The only thing missing is food, and for Meadow especially. That shortage is dangerous. Rune checks her skirt pocket and finds a key to Gideon's tenement building. There, she remembers, he kept some apples and hardtack stored for emergencies. Her plan shifts. She will sneak into his apartment tonight, steal those supplies, then return to meet Alex. Fear prickles through her with the idea of breaking into Gideon's apartment. Stealth is essential. Discovery would be a disaster. Rune steels herself anyway. She knows she must do this for Aurelia and Meadow. Even if Gideon is there, Rune believes he won't betray her. He wants to capture witches, yes, but she hopes he won't turn her in. She hopes he'll wait. The thought offers a small comfort, but it does little to settle her nerves. Slipping off the boat under cover of darkness, Rune returns to the wharf and moves through alleys toward Gideon's building. The streets are quiet, mostly deserted, but the threat of Bloodguard patrols makes every shadow seem dangerous. Step by careful step, she climbs the stairs and unlocks the door with Gideon's key. Inside, she tiptoes past familiar walls that smell faintly of old wood, old paper, and memories she both cherishes and despises. Inside Gideon's kitchen, she gathers apples and hardtack, just enough to sustain them for their planned voyage. She pauses, thinking she might leave a note, or something to explain in case he returns early. Yet she doesn't. The weight of what she's doing, of trespassing, of relying on Gideon's unseen trust, presses on her chest. She tucks the food into a small bag and backtracks through the dark hallway, then down the stairs, leaving no sign behind. As she steps outside, clutching the food, her heart pounds with relief. But danger flares before she can reach the boat. A dog barks in a yard nearby. Rune freezes. She waits, listening to footsteps. The Bloodguard are not far off. With breath held, she slips into shadow, moving silently toward Dawn's Aria. The risk is high, every second heavy. Safe at last aboard the boat, Rune shares the food with Aurelia and Meadow. They eat in low light, the sound of waves and gulls outside the hull calming, at least for a moment. Rune watches the night sky, feeling the strain of her actions, fear, guilt, exhaustion, yet also fierce relief. She thinks of Gideon. Though she took from him without asking, she believes he will understand. Or at least, she hopes. Moonlight glimmers on the water around the boat. Rune wraps the stolen hardtack in cloth and holds it for Meadow. In that quiet moment, she allows herself to believe in this fragmented freedom, believing her actions, however dangerous, are steps toward something possible. The Bloodguard remains a threat. Gideon remains unpredictable. But for now, the night offers them a fragile refuge. Chapter 42. Moonlight falls over an old cemetery, pale and cold, as Gideon walks among family gravestones: son Sharpe, Levi, Tessa, Alex. Even though he dug Alex's grave only 2 months ago, finding himself kneeling here again stirs fresh grief. He moves his fingers over the stone, speaking to his brother aloud, asking for forgiveness for choices made, especially those involving Rune. The weight of loss presses in. Behind him, the crunch of footsteps signals someone approaching. Harrow comes into view among the gravestones, bearing news. Commander Noah has ordered increased security at the waterfront, especially the harbor, anticipating Rune may try to escape again. Gideon nods, but when Harrow warns that Noah lacks affection for him and wouldn't hesitate to kill him if Rune escapes, the threat cuts deeper. Gideon steels himself for what must come. Harrow, quiet and reserved, opens up. She reveals the story of her missing ear, which led to her scar. Born into poverty, sold to a witch family, she learned words and books from Juniper, their daughter, and grew close to her. When her attachment was discovered, her family punished her by cutting off the ear and locking her in a cellar. Survival came only when a soldier freed her and announced the revolution's end and the death of the sister queens. She doesn't feel free, though. The scars run deeper. Gideon listens, the cemetery shadows flickering across Harrow's face. For once, his posture softens. He reaches out as if to comfort her, though he holds back. His own guilt and regrets swirl choices made in service to duty, betrayals, and the cost of what he agreed to. He wonders if Harrow's pain isn't also his burden, intertwined in ways he has ignored. The graveyard remains silent for a moment, only wind in the pines around them. Gideon turns back to Alex's grave, the weight of his words unsaid. He thinks of Rune, how he let things happen, what he believed to be choices, now questioning what was avoidable. Harrow's story echoes in his head. Love, betrayal, loss. Not just Rune's story, but theirs, intertwined by revolution and magic. Lightning flickers in distant skies. Harrow rises from the gravestone and warns Gideon not to forget whose side he is on, reminding him that every choice could leave scars worse than the physical. Gideon watches her leave, her silhouette faint in moonlight, scar and all. He remains among the stones for a long while, memories and promises caught in the cold night air. When Gideon finally gets up, he does not leave immediately. He presses his hand to Alex's headstone, tears unseen under the moonlight, speaking again his apology. He admits to himself that his life, his decisions, have not always been for duty alone. Rune's betrayal, her survival, love, guilt, they all mix in his veins. He stands, shoulders squared, knowing he must act, not just past regrets, but what's coming. As the moon climbs higher, Gideon leaves the graveyard, heading toward the crow's nest, where soldiers await him. Hopes and fears weigh alike. He carries Harrow's warning, the knowledge that tonight's security is tighter, that every guard, every patrol, might be tasked to stop him or Rune. Yet resolve burns in him. Even in the betrayal, even in the doubt, he knows he must choose between the Empire, the Revolution, and the woman who changed everything. Chapter 43. Rune wakes in a dim, stone-walled chamber, the scent of damp earth filling her lungs. She realizes quickly that she is not free. Chains bite into her wrists and ankles, their iron etched with runes meant to suppress her magic. Panic rises, but she forces herself to breathe. She remembers being captured, the chaos of soldiers storming in, and Gideon's face just before darkness claimed her. The memory makes her heart twist. She doesn't know if he betrayed her or saved her. The silence is broken when the door scrapes open. Commander Noah steps inside, his presence sharp and calculating. He circles Rune like a hawk, sizing up prey. He makes it clear that she is valuable only as a weapon or a corpse. His words drip with venom as he reminds her of the chaos she has sown, the Imperial soldiers she has killed, and the fear her name now carries in every city. Rune tries to hold her ground, but the chains and exhaustion weigh her down. Noah leans closer and suggests that Gideon was the one who handed her over. The thought stabs at Rune, though she refuses to let him see the depth of her doubt. She spits back that Gideon is not like him, but even as she says it, her chest tightens. Noah smirks, planting seeds of mistrust with every sentence. He speaks of loyalty, duty, and how easily Gideon could sacrifice her for the Empire's cause. The cruelty in his tone makes Rune's blood boil, yet her body trembles under the chains. After Noah leaves, the room feels heavier. Rune closes her eyes and lets her mind wander to Gideon. She recalls their conversations, the rare softness in his voice when he let his guard down. She wonders if he is out there planning her rescue, or if he has chosen the Empire over her. The uncertainty gnaws at her, tearing through her anger until it becomes a deep ache in her chest. Later, Harrow enters, carrying a small bowl of water. Her scar is visible in the low light, a reminder of her own suffering. She sets the bowl down and tells Rune to drink. Though her voice is flat, there is something in her eyes that Rune recognizes pain, and maybe pity. Rune asks why she is helping her at all, but Harrow only mutters that survival is complicated. The unspoken words between them carry weight, as if Harrow's past has chained her just as tightly as these iron cuffs bind Rune. Rune drinks slowly, her thoughts sharp. She studies Harrow, searching for cracks in her loyalty. She dares to ask whether Gideon knows where she is, but Harrow doesn't answer. Instead, she warns Rune not to trust anyone, not even those she thinks care for her. The words echo Noah's earlier cruelty, yet from Harrow they sound more like a weary truth than a threat. Rune swallows hard, uncertain which warning to believe. When Harrow leaves, Rune is alone again in the suffocating darkness. The chains clink whenever she shifts, reminding her that time is running short. Her mind runs over escape plans, none of them realistic. Still, she refuses to give up. Even if Gideon has betrayed her, she will not let Noah decide her fate. Determination burns in her chest, a fragile but unyielding flame. As the night drags on, Rune presses her forehead against the cold wall. She whispers promises to herself that she will survive, that she will see Gideon again, and that she will not be broken. Whether her hope is foolish or not, she clings to it. In the stillness, her pulse steadies. She has lost battles before, but never the will to fight. And she will not start now. Chapter 44. Rune wakes to the sound of boots echoing in the hallway outside her cell. Her muscles ache from the chains, but she lifts her head when the door creaks open. This time it is not Noah or Harrow, but Gideon. He steps inside quietly, his eyes sweeping over her restraints before settling on her face. For a long moment, neither speaks. The weight of betrayal hangs between them, sharp and suffocating. Rune wants to scream at him, demand answers, but her throat tightens with anger and doubt. Finally, Gideon breaks the silence. His voice is low, almost strained, as he tells her that he had no choice. Rune laughs bitterly, asking if delivering her into Imperial chains was the only path left to him. Her words strike deep, and he flinches, though his composure quickly returns. He insists he is trying to protect her in the only way he can. But she does not believe him. To her, his explanation is nothing more than an excuse for betrayal. The argument grows sharper, emotions colliding with years of mistrust and unspoken feelings. Rune throws his promises back at him, reminding him of the nights he swore to keep her safe, of the way he once looked at her as if she was more than a weapon. Gideon clenches his fists, fighting to hold his ground. He tells her that protecting her does not always mean keeping her free, and that some choices are made not out of desire, but necessity. The words cut both ways, leaving them both raw and wounded. Rune studies him carefully, searching for cracks in his armor. Beneath his sternness, she sees exhaustion and something that looks like regret. For a heartbeat, she wonders if his choices are driven by fear, not treachery. Still, the pain of being chained because of him is too fresh, and she cannot let herself soften. She spits out that she trusted him more than anyone else, and he destroyed that trust with one decision. The hurt in her voice fills the cell more than her anger. Gideon takes a step closer, his expression unreadable. He lowers his voice, telling her that there are forces at work greater than both of them, and that she does not see the whole picture. Rune glares at him, demanding to know what he is hiding, but he refuses to give her more. His silence infuriates her, and she pulls at her chains until her wrists bleed. The sound of iron scraping stone echoes harshly, a reminder of her helplessness. For a fleeting second, Gideon looks as if he wants to break her free, his hand twitching near the chains. But he forces himself to step back. He tells her to endure a little longer, to trust that there is a reason for all of this. Rune laughs bitterly again, accusing him of asking for loyalty when he has given her nothing but lies. Her voice cracks as she says she would rather die than remain his pawn. The words leave Gideon pale, though he masks it quickly. He finally turns toward the door, his back stiff with tension. Before leaving, he tells her quietly that everything he does is for her, though she may never understand it until the end. Rune's chest tightens at the words, torn between anger and the flicker of something she refuses to name. When the door slams shut, she is left trembling in the dark, her emotions a storm she cannot calm. Alone once more, Rune sinks against the wall, her chains rattling with every breath. Her mind replays his words, the contradictions of his actions, and the memory of his eyes when he looked at her. Confusion and pain knot inside her, but beneath it all, a spark of stubborn determination remains. She will find the truth, whether it damns Gideon or redeems him. Until then, she endures, clinging to her will as tightly as the chains hold her body. Chapter 45. The cell door opened again not long after Gideon's departure, and this time it was Harrow who entered, carrying the air of command with every step. His soldiers lingered behind him, their armor glinting faintly in the torchlight. Rune forced herself to stand, though her body trembled from fatigue. Harrow studied her like a specimen, his gaze cold and sharp, as if weighing her worth. He commented on her stubbornness, mocking her for holding on when so many others would have broken by now. Rune refused to answer, meeting his taunts with silence that only deepened his amusement. Harrow circled her slowly, his voice a mix of admiration and cruelty. He spoke of her power, calling it both a gift and a curse, and suggested that the Empire could use her if only she bent to their will. Rune spat back that she would never serve them, her words carrying venom despite the weakness in her body. Her defiance drew a smirk from him, and he leaned closer, whispering that every rebel has a breaking point. The way he said it made Rune's skin crawl, but she lifted her chin, unwilling to let him see fear. He motioned to the soldiers, and one dragged forward a beaten prisoner from another cell. The man was barely conscious, his face bloodied and his clothes torn. Harrow forced Rune to watch as the man was struck again, each blow echoing through the chamber. Harrow told her that this was what happened to those who stood against the Empire, and that her choices would decide the fate of many more. Rune's heart pounded as she clenched her fists, rage flooding through her at his cruelty. She wanted to unleash her magic, but the chains held her tight, mocking her helplessness. The display ended with Harrow ordering the prisoner dragged away, leaving a trail of blood on the stone floor. He turned back to Rune and told her the Empire would continue to crush the rebels one by one, no matter how fiercely they fought. Rune met his gaze with burning hatred, telling him that fear might silence some, but it would never erase the fire in others. Harrow's smile widened at her words, as though her resistance was exactly what he hoped to hear. To him, her spirit was not a threat, but a challenge. Their exchange grew sharper, with Harrow pressing her for information about rebel strongholds. Rune refused every time, her answers blunt and unyielding. He reminded her of Gideon's presence among the Empire, twisting the knife by suggesting that Gideon had chosen a side long ago. Rune's chest tightened at his words, though she refused to let her doubt show. She countered by saying that loyalty is something the Empire will never understand. Her defiance made Harrow laugh, a hollow sound that chilled her to the bone. Before leaving, Harrow leaned close again, his tone darker. He promised that Rune would not break today, or even tomorrow, but eventually she would. He warned her that pain and isolation had a way of eating through even the strongest armor. Rune kept her eyes locked on his, refusing to look away. She told him calmly that if he thought she would bend to him, then he did not know her at all. The words lingered in the air, firm and unwavering. When the soldiers followed Harrow out, Rune collapsed back against the wall, her breath uneven. The vision of the beaten prisoner haunted her, fueling both guilt and fury. She felt powerless, yet inside her a determination burned hotter than ever. She swore to herself that Harrow would never win, that she would never give him the satisfaction of her surrender. Even in chains, she clung to the strength of her will. As silence settled once more in the cell, Rune closed her eyes and steadied her breathing. She thought of Gideon, of the rebels still fighting, of the lives counting on her to hold out. Every heartbeat became a vow, each breath a reminder that survival was resistance. Whatever torments the Empire planned for her, she would endure them. And when the moment came, she would rise again, stronger and unbroken. Chapter 46. The night dragged on in Rune's cell, each hour stretching into eternity. The damp air pressed heavy on her lungs, and the silence was broken only by the scuttling of rats. She tried to rest, but her thoughts spun, circling back to Harrow's taunts and the image of the bloodied prisoner. Each memory stoked her anger until it became a steady flame in her chest. Rune knew the Empire wanted her spirit to crumble first, because once that happened, her body would follow. She resolved she would never let them see her weaken. When morning light seeped faintly through the cracks, the guards came again, pulling her from the cell. Chains rattled with each step as they led her down long corridors that reeked of mildew and iron. She noticed the details around her now, the banners on the walls, the cold precision of the fortress, each one a reminder of how deeply the Empire's power ran. Yet she also thought of how fragile power could be when faced with people who refused to bow. The guards brought her to a larger chamber, this one filled with maps, scrolls, and tables scattered with tokens marking territories. Rune's stomach clenched. It was a war room. Harrow was already there, standing with officers, his presence dominating the space. He looked at her as though she were both a curiosity and a weapon yet to be forged. Without greeting her, he gestured for the guards to force her onto her knees. She refused to fall fully, keeping her back straight, meeting their cruelty with pride. Harrow began to speak of campaigns and battles, pointing to the maps as though she were a student being taught a lesson. He listed names of rebel leaders who had been captured or slain. Each revelation meant to break her hope. Rune listened silently, refusing to show the shock that rippled through her. Some of the names she recognized. Some were dear to her. But she locked her grief deep inside, because grief was exactly what Harrow wanted to see on her face. As the officers left, Harrow turned his full attention back to Rune. He spoke in low tones about choice, power, and survival. He told her that the Empire did not need to kill her. They could use her magic, and in return she would live in comfort and safety. Rune's answer was immediate and sharp, her voice ringing against the stone walls. She said she would rather die in chains than live as a tool for tyrants. Her words hit like a strike, and for a moment even Harrow's smile faltered. His response came swift and cold. He ordered the guards to take her back, but not before leaning down to whisper that her pride would lead others to their deaths. He claimed that leaders who resist always doom their followers first. Rune's jaw clenched as she held back the storm of emotions inside. She wanted to scream, to lash out, but she only stared into his eyes with quiet fury. She would not give him the satisfaction of her rage. The guards dragged her once more through the halls, their boots striking in unison. Rune's body ached from every pull and shove, but her mind raced with determination. She memorized the pathways, the guard numbers, and the locked doors. Even in her weakest moments, she gathered information like shards of a weapon she would someday wield. She promised herself this place would not be her tomb. Back in her cell, Rune leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. Her body trembled, but her spirit refused to bend. She thought of Gideon, somewhere out there navigating his own dangerous path. She thought of the rebels who might still hold hope alive. And as darkness fell once again over the fortress, she whispered to herself that one day she would turn the Empire's cruelty against them. Chapter 47. The fortress remained tense as dawn broke, the Empire's banners catching pale light in the courtyard. Rune was not brought out for interrogation this time. Instead, the guards rushed past her cell, their movements sharper, their voices clipped with urgency. Something had shifted. She listened carefully, catching fragments of words: rebels, ambush, escape. Her pulse quickened. Gideon had to be close. By midday, Rune was dragged out again, but not to Harrow's war room. The guards led her toward the outer walls where the sound of fighting echoed in the distance. Imperial soldiers lined the battlements, shouting orders and firing volleys of arrows into the mountains. Rune lifted her eyes, straining to see beyond the haze, and her heart leapt. In the distance, figures darted through the cliffs, using smoke and fire to mask their movements. The rebels had come. Harrow stood at the center of the chaos, directing his men with chilling composure. His gaze flicked toward Rune as she was forced to her knees beside him, as though her presence was meant to remind him of the Empire's control. But Rune caught sight of Gideon among the rebels, his stance unyielding, his sword flashing in the smoke. Their eyes met across the battlefield for a fleeting heartbeat, and in that instant, Rune felt her resolve harden into steel. The rebels struck with precision, cutting off supply lines and drawing Imperial troops into tight choke points. Rune noticed how they moved in small, coordinated groups, clearly guided by Gideon's hand. Arrows hissed overhead, some striking dangerously close, yet the rebels pressed forward. Panic rippled through the Imperial ranks for the first time, the perfect rhythm of their defense broken by fire and shadows. Harrow barked orders to bring Rune forward, his intention clear: to use her as leverage, to break Gideon's focus. Soldiers yanked her chains, dragging her onto the wall for all to see. Rune stumbled, but forced herself upright, glaring out into the smoke-filled air. Gideon's head snapped upward at the sight of her, and for a moment, everything else fell away. The roar of battle, the clash of steel, the cries of men. The Empire meant to turn her into a weapon against her own people. But before Harrow could finish his threat, the rebels unleashed a barrage of fire-tipped arrows that set the outer towers ablaze. Screams rose as flames consumed the wooden scaffolds, forcing soldiers to abandon their posts. In the confusion, a rebel squad broke through a gate on the eastern side, cutting down guards in a rush of steel and smoke. Rune felt hope surge, stronger than chains or fear. Harrow cursed and ordered Rune pulled back inside, but the flames spread too fast, and the Imperial lines faltered. Gideon led a charge into the courtyard, his blade carving a path through enemy soldiers. Rune shouted his name, her voice carrying above the roar of battle. He turned toward her, his eyes blazing, and fought harder, each strike drawing him closer to her. The clash in the fortress grew bloodier, smoke and fire swallowing the once imposing stronghold. Rune's chains burned against her wrists as the guards tightened their grip, but she no longer felt fear. The tide was shifting, and she knew the rebels would not leave without her. This was the moment everything had been leading to the rebellion striking at the Empire's heart, and the bonds between her and Gideon tested against the fire of war. Chapter 48. Smoke thickened the air as the rebels pushed deeper into the fortress. The courtyard became a storm of fire and steel, bodies colliding in desperate combat. Rune struggled against her captors, the iron biting into her wrists, but her eyes stayed fixed on Gideon. He moved like a force of nature, each strike clearing the path forward. Soldiers tried to swarm him, yet none could hold against his precision. Every movement pulled him closer to where she stood bound, her heart pounding harder with each step he took. Harrow did not falter. His calm presence cut through the chaos as he raised his blade and ordered his men to form a shield wall around Rune. He knew Gideon's weakness was not steel, but the witch he sought to free. Rune felt the circle tighten, a living barrier of armor and weapons. Fear threatened to choke her, but she clenched her jaw. If Gideon risked everything to reach her, then she would not let despair be the Empire's victory. The clash came with the weight of destiny. Gideon threw himself against Harrow's guard, his sword crashing against shields, sparks flying as steel locked with steel. The rebels surged at his back, their battle cries filling the courtyard, but the Imperials fought like cornered wolves. Rune was shoved to the ground in the press of movement, the stones cold against her knees, yet her eyes never left Gideon. She whispered a word of power, and for the first time since her capture, magic flared at her fingertips. A ripple of energy burst outward, knocking one of the guards off balance. Chains still bound her, limiting the flow of her power, but the spark was enough. Gideon noticed, seizing the opening to drive his blade past a soldier's guard. Blood splattered across the cobblestones. Harrow's gaze flicked toward Rune, sharp and calculating, and Rune saw it clearly. He would rather see her dead than let her be taken back. The thought chilled her, but it also fueled her determination. As the battle raged, Aiden broke through the smoke with a handful of rebels, cutting into the shield wall from the side. Rune nearly wept with relief at the sight of him, though exhaustion lined his face. Together with Gideon, they tore open a gap in the circle of soldiers. Rune pushed herself to her feet, her chains rattling, and shouted Gideon's name again. His eyes locked onto hers, raw with fury and desperation. Harrow finally stepped forward, his blade gleaming, and met Gideon head-on. The two men clashed with a force that silenced everything around them, sparks flying as steel struck steel. Each blow was meant to kill, neither giving an inch. Rune's heart slammed against her ribs as she watched, powerless to intervene. Around them, rebels and Imperials continued to tear at each other, the fortress becoming a graveyard of stone and fire. Then, in a sudden surge of strength, Gideon forced Harrow back, his blade striking with brutal precision. Harrow staggered but did not fall, retreating into the shadows of the burning hall. Gideon turned instantly, his eyes finding Rune once more. A rebel soldier hacked through the last of her chains, and she stumbled forward into his arms. The relief was overwhelming, sharp enough to make her knees weaken, but Gideon held her steady, his hand firm at her back. The fortress groaned under the weight of destruction, flames climbing higher, and the Imperials retreating to regroup. Gideon gave the order to pull back, and the rebels began their escape through the eastern breach. Rune clung to him as they moved, the roar of fire and the stench of blood behind them. They had come for her, risked everything, and in the end, they had won. Not without scars, not without loss, but with a bond forged even stronger through fire and battle. Chapter 49. The night air outside the fortress felt sharp and cold, a cruel contrast to the smoke and fire they had left behind. The rebels moved quickly through the broken breach, guiding the wounded while keeping watch for any pursuit. Rune leaned against Gideon as they descended the rocky slopes, her body weak from the chains and the drain of her magic. Every step was an effort, but she refused to slow him down. Around them, the soldiers' faces were streaked with soot and blood, their eyes still burning with the intensity of the battle they had survived. When they finally reached the cover of the forest, the company collapsed into silence. Only the distant crackle of the burning fortress carried through the night, reminding them of the destruction left behind. Gideon kept Rune close, checking her wrists where the iron had bitten deep. She hissed at the sting, but his touch was steady, careful, as if afraid she might vanish if he let go. The unspoken relief between them was heavy, yet neither spoke. The weight of everything endured still hung in the air. Aiden arrived moments later with the last of the rear guard, his arm bleeding freely from a cut across his shoulder. "We bought enough time," he muttered, collapsing beside the fire the rebels hastily lit. His exhaustion was plain, his voice raw, but his eyes softened when they fell on Rune. "You're safe now." "That's all that matters." Rune reached for his hand, squeezing it briefly before he turned away, unwilling to show more weakness in front of the others. As the soldiers tended to the wounded, murmurs spread about the losses they had taken. Several had fallen in the courtyard, and the price of the rescue weighed heavily on all of them. Rune listened in silence, guilt twisting deep in her chest. She knew some blamed her for the sacrifice, for the risk that had nearly cost them everything. Yet when her gaze drifted to Gideon, she saw no regret in his eyes, only resolve. He had chosen her, and that truth alone gave her strength to face the whispers. Later, when most of the camp had settled into restless sleep, Rune sat apart from the others, the firelight flickering across her face. Gideon joined her without a word, settling at her side. For a long while they sat in silence, listening to the wind stir through the trees. Finally, Rune whispered, "They died because of me." Her voice cracked, and the words tasted like ash. Gideon turned toward her, his expression firm but not unkind. "They died for the cause," he answered quietly. "And you are part of that cause. Don't carry this weight alone." His words struck something deep within her, though the ache did not fade. Rune leaned into him, her shoulder brushing his, and felt some of the cold inside her begin to ease. For the first time since her capture, warmth spread through her chest, fragile but real. She closed her eyes, letting herself rest in that closeness, even if only for a moment. Around them, the night stretched wide and dark, but beside Gideon, she felt less alone. The scouts returned near dawn with news that the Imperials had pulled back to regroup further south. The fortress burned still, its black smoke staining the horizon. It meant they had a small window of safety, though none doubted Harrow would return with greater force. Gideon gathered the men, his voice steady as he laid out their next course. They would travel east into the valleys, regroup with allies, and prepare for the Empire's inevitable strike. His certainty steadied them, even as their bodies trembled from fatigue. Rune listened, her hand resting lightly over the bandages at her wrists. The path ahead was dangerous, perhaps even hopeless, but she felt something shift inside her. They had risked everything to bring her back, and though it weighed on her heart, it also reminded her of who she was. No longer a prisoner, no longer bound in chains. She was Rune, the witch they feared, and with Gideon beside her, she was determined to turn that fear against the Empire that had sought to break her. This has been the summary of Rebel Witch, the Crimson Moth, Book 2, summarized by Cellwave Audio and narrated by Bill.